Let's get a hold of Mr. Sydney Mwamba. He's executive director of an organization called the Policy Monitoring and Research Center. He joins us via the telephone to talk about Zambia's debt restructuring and the agreement that was signed over the weekend, over the past couple of days. We've got in a bit more detail. The Minister of Finance yesterday was in Parliament addressing Parliament and giving a ministerial statement, and he gave out some specific details in terms of the debt restructuring. Good evening, Mr. Sydney Mwamba. How are you today?
Good evening, Luchi. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for for joining us this evening. I wanted to begin first of all, just so that maybe there might be somebody who might not be familiar, might not have heard of the Policy Monitoring and Research Center. You just want to tell us a little bit about what PMRC is and what exactly it does.
So, Policy Monitoring and Research Center is a public policy think tank that was established in 2012 to complement government efforts in public policy. So we do work with a number of institutions ranging from academia, government ministries, civil society, in making sure that evidence-based policy research is well disseminated to the public.
Okay. So, in regards to this conversation that we've all been having around our debt being restructured and the agreement, do you want to give us a little preamble about why debt restructuring was necessary? Why we found ourselves in a position where we needed to have this conversation and push for debt restructuring?
Well, you may be able to understand that a few years ago, Zambia had faced a crisis of crippling debt. And during the period 2020, in the last quarter of that year, the country became the first nation in Africa to default on its sovereign debt. And that was during the COVID period, which was amounting to 42.5 million of the Eurobond payment, which was due by then. Apart from that, one of the main issues that basically was critical was the rising debt. You could also see that from 2011, Zambia had a debt of about 1.98 billion, and this grew to about 13.04 billion US dollars in 2021. So this was a serious concern to the country. And as it is already known, that projected value of Zambia's external debt that we currently have of around 18.6 billion, of this value, you realize that we have bilateral as well as commercial lenders, and you will now realize that we were finally allowed to restructure our 6.3 billion debt, and that debt for the private creditors, or who we may call commercial banks or bondholders, who we owe about 4.3 billion, needs to be negotiated in line with the G20 framework going forward.
Yeah. Now there's a conversation. I'm not sure if you've been following this narrative, not even a conversation, but a narrative that maybe what we should have been pushing for rather than debt restructuring is, debt relief, debt write-off. So my question, to you, Mr. Sydney Mwamba, is what does debt restructuring actually entail? But also, how does it differ from, say, trying to get a different form of debt relief, whether it's a debt write-off? What does it entail, and what's the difference?
Well, you may note that from the word go, when government has been negotiating for this debt restructuring, much of it, government has been asking for debt write-off. They've been asking for haircuts and so on. But I think time and again, things are changing. Nations need to be responsible for their own debt. In trying to just talk about debt restructuring, so this is basically a modification of the terms of payment where the country's debt obligation is reduced to make sure that the burden is in a way that it can be manageable in terms of the repayment term. You can also know that when we look at what has been agreed, you realize that we have now an extension period of up to 12 years with a grace period of 3 years for us to begin to pay this debt. So debt restructuring, the one that we have gotten has basically is basically talking about, it involves the repayment, extending the repayment period, which they have done, the issue of lowering interest rates, and even sometimes it could be maybe a portion of the debt that is forgiven. Unlike debt relief, which usually involves a complete cancellation of debt, debt restructuring allows us now as a country to continue repaying our creditors, but under a more favorable condition, which we are actually intends for us to manage. So basically, that's the difference between when we talk about debt cancellation. It simply means that part of our debt could have been cancelled, but in this case, our debt still stands. The only thing is that we'll have to pay it for a longer period of time, and that we have a breather of 3 years for us to reorganize our house in order for us to gain a little bit of resources which we can now use to be able to begin repaying this debt. But also, it also paves way for the IMF bailout disbursement, which will be very critical for us to continue growing other sectors of the economy.
Okay, so yesterday the Minister of Finance was in Parliament. He gave a ministerial, statement address to Parliament regarding the debt restructure and some of the details. For those that missed it, and maybe you can help us out. For those that missed it, what were the specific, crucial details that we as citizens need to know of?
Yeah, so some of the specific details that we need to know are that the principal repayment are to begin after 3 years in 2026 at a rate of 0.5% or about $30 million yearly, and this will be paid up to 2035. Zambia will also pay interest rate of as low as 1%, but not more than 2.5 until 2037 as part of its debt restructuring deal. The deal also includes a contingency. If Zambia's economy performs better than expected, at which point creditors will get paid more. So what this simply means is that currently, in terms of assessment, we have weak fundamentals, but once these fundamentals improve, we might be given a match. We might be given slightly lower period of payment for us to be able to pay off that debt. Then also we should be able to know that Zambia has been working closely with the International Monetary Fund and other creditors to renegotiate these new terms for our debt. The country has actually now shown a lot of commitment in terms of fiscal discipline, implementing economic reforms, and ensuring transparency in managing its finances. So certainly with this willingness, we expect that we should be able to be in the right frame to be able to circumvent under these conditions that have been set.
It's also important, Mr. Mwamba, to also take note of the fact that one of the things the Minister said yesterday in his address was the restructuring agreement covers only $6.3 billion of our total debt. So what about the rest of this debt? You want to explain the rest of this debt, why the rest of this debt is not covered in this current deal?
Okay, so this is very true. What has been restructured currently is the 6.3 billion of our debt. And so we do also have other private creditors who are owed around 6.8 billion. These creditors include the BlackRock, Israel Discount Bank, Investec, Standard Chartered, and other Western private creditors and some of the Chinese commercial lenders. Okay? Then Zambia remains in discussion with these creditors with the hope that they will agree to the restructuring agreement that is comparable to that which was struck with the creditors regarding the 6.3 billion. Of course, you are aware that in negotiating for debt, most creditors would like that the G20 framework is applied, which basically where we need to ensure that we apply a fair treatment to each of our creditors.
Okay, so in terms of, and this is maybe the big one, this is probably the most important question that I've asked for the benefit of everyone out there who's listening this evening. This agreement, I know it's not in totality in terms of our full debt stock, but how does this agreement impact the economy? And more importantly, how does it benefit the ordinary Zambian citizen?
Well, this is quite a big milestone for the country. And so the debt restructuring is expected to have several positive effects on the Zambian economy. So firstly, it will help reduce the country's debt burden and in turn free up a lot of resources which will be used for investment in the critical sectors such as infrastructure, health sector, education, which are very critical in driving our economy. Secondly, you realize that having restructured this debt, it simply means that we now have restored confidence among us international investors and lenders, and so even our credit rating is likely to go up. So it is important that once you know that your credit rating goes up, it becomes very important that many other financial institutions will basically, financial institutions and investors will basically look up to the country in terms of investment. So this whole big picture is quite very important that the debt restructuring deal has actually done. So this will certainly, in the long run, allow many other sectors to be able to open up. For example, we do expect that the mining sector will actually allow more serious investors to come into the country to be able to open up more mining ventures and activities. And of course, it will also allow companies, the private sector, to invest in various ventures in different value additions because they know that they are in safe hands, the economy is now destined into the positive trajectory.
Yeah, so I need you to break it down, because one of the things that I've been hearing from those who are in leadership, they keep saying, look, we need to go down and really explain, this debt restructuring agreement to everybody so that they try and understand what it means. And I'm assuming that part of that includes what the benefits are. So here's a question that sort of amplifies this so that you can try and explain it at this level. How does the restructured debt, how is that going to affect the poorest on the street, the woman who sells roasted groundnuts and tute on the roadside? How do they benefit? How do we make sure that the benefit really trickles down to the lowest of those levels?
Okay, so you realize that from the ministerial statement, the minister did mention that there will be about 5.3 billion that is going to be in form of savings due to the debt restructuring. But apart from that, what it means is that this grace period, instead of us paying, most of the resources that are going to be generated by the country will now go into serious productive sectors such as agriculture, the mining, and so on. So in terms of those that sell, in terms of the common people on the ground, the benefit is likely to trickle down in terms of once the economy begins to be on the right trajectory, you expect right economic fundamentals to be able to be in place. But that simply needs to translate into reduced cost in terms of food prices. It will also need to trickle down in terms of employment creation, because many institutions such as the private sector will have to expand their businesses, and they will require to employ more Zambians. It will also mean that there will be increased productivity, but increased productivity doesn't just come so easily. It requires that these people that are on the ground can be employed in various sectors such as construction and so on and so forth. So ultimately, there will be increased income that will be expended at a lower level, and people can be able to better off their lives as compared to when the country is actually physical tight, where you and I might be complaining that there are no resources in the economy for us to be able to circumvent and do business and so on.
So here's another argument to this. So in as much as we've restructured this debt, it doesn't mean that we don't have to pay it back. At some point, we have to start thinking about paying it back.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so one of the key sectors in this is mining. Depending on who you speak to, whether it's the Minister of Mines, the Minister of Finance, they all talk about 3 million tons of copper per annum in terms of production. Is this sustainable in terms of the restructured debt, and how do we make sure that we reach that level, that 3 million tons, that will enable us to sort of have that sort of money to pay back?
Yeah, I think you realize that the issue of increasing the 3 million metric tons of copper in the next decade will be very critical in sustaining our economy through our restructured debt. But what this simply means is that earlier on I had mentioned that now that we have the debt restructured, we certainly have triggered investor confidence. But what will now this thing do? It will basically now mean that once we increase our copper production, we are going to have increased exports. So we are saying that higher copper production would lead to increased export volumes and revenue. And with this strong global demand for copper, especially with the emerging economies and the issue of renewable energy technologies, Zambia will certainly benefit from the higher prices and increased market access. You may also be aware that the issue of the electrical vehicles is actually one aspect that is pushing the price of copper upfront. So the additional export earnings can help generate foreign exchange needed to meet our debt repayment obligation once we are ready, or once the 3-year period actually passes.
Yeah, I wonder whether this is an unfair question to ask, but I'll ask you because obviously you're coming from a think tank, policy monitoring and research center, so you've done the research on this. But should the focus purely be on copper, or should we be focusing on something else, i.e., agriculture, as a way of getting the sort of forex that we need to be able to find ourselves in a position to be able to pay back?
Yeah, certainly.
And whether it's agriculture, tourism. I mean, I know I just mentioned agriculture, but there's tourism as well, and some of the other sectors as well.
Yes, very true. Increasing the issue of increasing copper production to 3 million metric tons in the next decade is just one of the ways in which we could be able to raise money for us in terms of increasing our foreign exchange that would be used later on to pay the state. But however, key strategies, especially those of increasing our productivity in the agricultural sector, is very key. As you may know that agriculture is basically second from the mining sector. So it would be important that during this period we implement policies that are going to be very critical in increasing our productivity. You are aware that our support towards the agricultural sector in terms of the farmer input support program, in terms of productivity, we are still grappling with low yields despite increasing the allocation. So it would be important that we come up with strategies, and especially that government is now trying to come up with an all-inclusive framework, which is the Comprehensive Agriculture Transformation Program, CATSIP, which will not just focus on issues of providing inputs, focusing on maize and few legumes, but will also provide support in terms of financing, support in terms of irrigation support, support also in terms of extension and research and development. These are likely going to increase productivity, and we can generate a lot of foreign exchange out of there. So certainly diversifying our economy will be very key during this period away from copper, because certainly we know that sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, tourism as well as more investment in renewable energy would actually put us at a more better stance in terms of coming out strong and be able to begin paying this loan after 3 years without any difficulty.
Yeah, I also wonder in terms of policies, because one of the things that we obviously need now, other than just saying we need these sectors to sort of reach optimal levels, but another thing that we need is policy direction. So what policy direction do you think the government needs to take to ensure that there is productivity in many of these sectors that we need to be able to pay back?
Well, in the agricultural sector, I have mentioned about moving away from the issue of concentrating on the farmer input support program, which is FISIP, and diversifying by introducing a framework, a program called Comprehensive Agriculture Transformation Program, which is quite critical because it is all-encompassing. So, sorry. Before you continue, can you just explain this for many people? Because I've heard this new phrase without actually getting any details in terms of how it differs from FISIP. What's the difference between the two? You said all-encompassing, but in what sense? Yeah. So when we talk about the Comprehensive Agriculture Transformation Support Program, CATSIP, this is, like I've mentioned, that it is an all-encompassing. So in there, FISIP is just a component of CATSIP. But there are other programs of serious importance that will be supported in this program. So now, in there, you realize that there is an aspect of research and development. There is an aspect of not just looking at FISIP, but it will focus more on improving our extension services. There will also be an issue of providing financing, which is not really the case. So in this program, it will allow to finance viable farmers. And in this program, it will also facilitate for ensuring that issues to do with irrigation support, because you are aware about the issues of climate change and so on. So issues of climate change will be dealt with regards to provision of irrigation. So why are we saying that this is an all-encompassing program? Because it doesn't just focus on subsidy program, but it focuses also on financing. Because in the agricultural sector, you realize that there are many other farmers, emerging farmers, who can move from emerging to become commercial. But the biggest issue is about financing. So this program will facilitate for the establishment of institutions that will be able to provide some of these services and provide foresight. And this is quite one of the biggest agenda by the current government to be able to transform the agricultural sector going forward. So this framework, I think we should not mix it with FISIP. FISIP is just a component of TAXIP. I think that is the take-home message that every other person should be able to understand. We are not taking away anything from FISIP. It will be there, but it will be enhanced through some of the strategies that will be implemented in the whole program of TAXIP.
All right, just as I let you go this evening, actually there is one text message I want to read for you. This is from, there's no name on this, but it says, could you please ask Mr. Mwamba if there was a better alternative to debt restructuring apart from the debt cancellation, which is more of an embarrassment as a country?
Just come again.
So the question is, was there a better alternative to debt restructuring?
Well, like I mentioned from the word go, that dynamics around the world have been changing, and I think to me this is the better way that we could. This is the only better way, because it was quite difficult. You have seen how complex the whole situation was in terms of bringing these creditors onto the table to discuss the modalities of Zambia's debt. So, to me, the whole idea is that these creditors or the Western world is trying to tell us that we are not going to be dependent on their mercy going forward, and it tells us that we really need to be disciplined in terms of the way we acquire this debt. So it is quite just a lesson to us, and being a lesson to us, to me, I think this is the best possible way, because going forward, we will be very cautious in terms of how we acquire this debt and where we spend this debt, to just make sure that the value for money of the debt that we are going to contract in future is actually looked at in terms of where the investment is going to be done.
Mr. Mwamba, listen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Is there anything last that you want to say before I let you go?
Well, I think what we basically, in concluding this, we could just say that the debt restructuring agreement for Zambia basically represents a significant opportunity for it to address its debt challenges. And now it lays a foundation for a sustainable economic growth. And moving forward, as the country, we will require strong governance, continued commitment to reforms which are already going on, and the effective utilization of the resources that are now going to be freed up through this debt restructuring.
Mr. Mwamba from the Policy Monitoring and Research Center Executive Director, thank you so much for joining us on Tonight Live.
Thank you so much, Luke.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. That is Mr. Sydney Mwamba, just shedding a bit more light around the debt restructuring. It's a conversation that I know we'll be having over the next couple of days. Just trying to educate more and more people about what it generally means, for everybody. So thank you very much to Mr. Sydney Mwamba for joining us on Tonight Live.